Hey there, we're MainMiller, a consultancy that helps teams and companies to adopt Rust in their engineering organizations. And we're also a new group of contributors to the Rustacean Station community podcast. We're going to be releasing a number of interviews with great authors and people using Rust professionally over the coming month. You can also find a link to the video of the conversation in the show notes. Enjoy!
Hey everyone, I'm Marco from Main Matter. Today I'm joined by Joel Marcey, Director of Technology at the Rust Foundation. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks, Marco. Thank you so much for having me.
Could you introduce yourself and also the foundation maybe and the work that you're doing there?
Sure. I'm Joel Marcey, Director of Technology at the Rust Foundation. For those that don't know what the Rust Foundation is, it's an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to stewarding the Rust programming language, nurturing the Rust ecosystem, and probably most importantly, supporting the set of awesome maintainers governing and developing the project. As Director of Technology, what that means in practice is that I support the technical initiatives and programs that are managed or run by the foundation itself. So a couple of examples around this. A visible example of this is our security initiative, where we have a dedicated engineering team working with the Rust project and throughout the ecosystem to assess the security landscape and find high impact areas where we may be able to shore up any potential security gaps. I also support the infrastructure side of the foundation, whether that's like direct infrastructure that we use or infrastructure that's used by the project. We support that as well. And we also have a dedicated engineer for that as well. So basically anything technical that happens in the foundation, I help support that.
I see. I guess in that role, you also talk to a lot of companies sort of that use Rust or like think about using Rust or adopting Rust and hear a lot of like experience that they have and challenges that they are facing, right?
So as a foundation, right, we're funded through companies, and we talk to a lot of companies to see whether they're using Rust, if they're interested in using Rust, if they might want to be a member of the foundation because of their interest in Rust. And we do this through various vehicles like going to conferences, whether we're just attending or speaking, through contacts that we make and those sorts of things. So yeah, we have a list of companies that are members of the foundation, and we are talking to a lot more folks as well.
Also, Main Matter is a happy member as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Main Matter, and thank you, Marco.
Yeah, thank you for your work. I mean, we're happy to support it with a like very small contribution. I think in this series we're specifically interested in sort of showing how companies can adopt Rust, sort of talking about the benefits, also in an attempt to support engineers at companies with a different technology stack, maybe to convince management to adopt Rust and so on, because there's many people out there who want to use Rust, but who are using other things right now. So could you maybe talk a bit about sort of the positive experience and sort of the value that companies that have already adopted Rust get out of that decision?
Yeah, when you talk about benefits, it's almost an easy and hard question to answer at the same time. So I want to try to stay as objective as possible, because obviously I have my biases since I work for the Rust Foundation, and I do that because I believe in the language and the ecosystem and, the benefits that they all provide. That said, I'm always quick to point out that Rust is not a panacea, and it's not necessarily suitable for every single engineering situation. So just to level set that a little bit to make sure that I'm trying to stay somewhat objective here. The benefits are fairly clear and well documented. Rust provides a safe, secure, yet really optimized environment for your projects. I tend to think of a saying, it's one of those have your cake and eat it too situations where you're nearly guaranteed to have a secure application that runs fast. Not many languages and ecosystems can say that. I did say nearly on purpose because, as I stated before, we do have a security initiative to make sure that we're as close to 100% true on the secure part as possible. So I don't want to, always say 100%, but it's, 99.999% guaranteed to have a secure application, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
I think with Rust, you can make the argument that, or companies can make the argument that you're not only will you likely actually improve the performance of an application or applications that you're developing, which may save your customers time and you as a company like dollars and actual real money, but you also have to worry about less things. So for example, you might not have to have as big of a security response team as you might need if you developed the application in another ecosystems or something like that. So, you can, yeah, I mean, Rust has those types of benefits. I think companies are kind of starting to see that as you see the adoption of Rust grow pretty quickly now.
And what fields do you mainly see Rust being adopted in, sort of among the companies you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, the general consensus is, Rust is really, really great for systems programming, backend programming, CLI based applications. There's still opportunity out there for Rust to be more of a first class solution for web applications and web dev and those sorts of things as well. But I think right now, if you ask anybody, it's, developing those systems that maybe support web applications in the backside or something like that. That's where we kind of see them at this point in time.
I guess that's certainly true, but like I said, there's definitely potential for like web cloud apps as well. And like I think sort of the two main reasons there are probably efficiency and like performance efficiency, like kind of two like sides of the same thing, right? I think particularly stability and reliability as well, right? The fact that sort of you don't have to go back and fix something that you release because it ends up having hundreds and hundreds of bugs in production then, right?
Because you're finding a lot of those things before you launch it, right? I mean, that's the benefit of a compiled based programming language like Rust. You tend to, and with Rust, it actually helps you along the way to tell you what bugs that you're going to be preventing, because it's not going to allow you to do certain things that maybe other languages might. Right. So you're finding all these things a priori, and that, it's not going to obviously guarantee that something might not happen in production 100%, but you're getting very close to that because of the way Rust was designed to do when you do application.
Yeah. Could you share any success stories maybe or so, sort of around that, sort of around the concrete value in that sense that you get out of Rust?
So as the Rust Foundation, we have members, and some of those members have shared great success stories to us. So if you don't mind me taking the liberty to share some of those here. First one is 1Password. I use 1Password as my password manager. I've used it for a long time. I love it. A lot of people, especially if you use a Mac, use it. They use Rust, right? They now use Rust to make their flagship product as safe as possible because, as we talked about, Rust has memory safety guarantees and the high performance. And in fact, they've rewritten their entire product framework from scratch entirely in Rust. And I think they're very proud of that. And they, wrote a blog post for us describing their app development with Rust and how the memory models help them and that sort of thing. Another member is KDAB. They're using a combination of Rust and Qt, which is an embedded application framework. They're using those two, they're using Rust in that framework to create a front-end GUI and a back-end system integration to create embedded Rust applications. So, you have 1Password, which is kind of a client-side application with obviously back-end system. And then now you have like embedded applications. And then there's another member, it's spelled Tweed Golf, but I think it's pronounced Tweede Holf. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I think it's from the Netherlands. So if I
know them, but I also have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's Tweede Holf. If I'm saying that correctly, if anyone from Tweede Holf is watching and I said it wrong, I apologize. But they're using Rust to create an NTP, which is a network time protocol, and they're using Rust to create a client and server for that, with the goal to provide a secure, reliable implementation of NTP that can be used in security-based applications like Let's Encrypt or TLS certificate check. So very, very security focused. So you've seen kind of client application, embedded application, security use. And there's tons more anecdotes from just the foundation members that you can find, like on our website and those sorts of things. And I just thought of one more. Another anecdote that comes from my former company where I used to work before I joined the foundation, Meta, formerly known as Facebook. They literally last year, I think it was in July, made Rust a first-class supported language within the company. Now, Rust has been used at Facebook for a while before that, but with official support, that means the infrastructure team at Facebook can support it, like officially support it into things like the official IDE of Facebook or their source control systems, or just like within the code base in general. And the code base at Facebook is really large. And now there's first class support for Rust and Rust development there as well. So you're seeing companies small to big take the leap to utilize Rust.
And also for everyone who's interested, we had someone from Meta at one of the panels at last year's Eurorust, and he talked a bit about sort of how Meta uses Rust and how it benefits them.
Yeah, their use of Rust was a big reason why I got involved in the foundation. And so I was a member of the board of the Rust Foundation when I was at Meta, and then I loved it so much I decided to do this work full time. So
is there any sort of recommendation or so you would have for people who are trying to get Rust adopted in their own company, but they are using whatever, Java, C#? I think the question is also always sort of what's the return on investment, right? It's a huge investment, and it's a steep learning curve, so that you might be arguing to rewrite existing systems and so on. And the question is also always how does it make sense for the business, right? Is there any recommendation you have, or any techniques you have seen work in the past or so?
I think it's really important to be kind of upfront with folks about the benefits and the potential downsides. And as I said before, I don't want to come across as saying that Rust is going to solve 100% of 100% of problems. But the benefits really become clear once you have folks take the time to consider them. I'll keep repeating this probably, but memory safety, speed, no sacrificing one over the other, the awesome community that exists to help you get started with your application. And I think you definitely want to lean into the security angle of things because of the kind of the hyper focus on security from companies and governments now. And in fact, actually, this is kind of a tangential aside here, but Rust was just added to the United States government National Institute of Standards and Technology list of safer languages last week. So NIST, Rust, they have this page with safer languages, and Rust, I believe, is the first kind of more general purpose programming language that's been added to that list. So now you have the government, saying the value of Rust. You have to acknowledge there's going to be front-loaded costs to moving to Rust, probably more so for existing projects, but even for new projects, you have to make it clear to companies that you have to be all in, right? And to allowing your employees to take the time to learn the language, have a plan to integrate Rust into their development workflow, but be clear that that front-loaded time is going to serve them really well on the back end, because Rust is going to make your application more secure. Your developers are going to become more productive. You're not going to have to support your application as much, and so that front loaded cost is going to be well worth it. I think you also need to take time to understand their particular use cases, right? And be honest which ones may be difficult to use Rust with when it comes to the three vectors of cost and time and technology. And as we stated before, web development, Rust might be getting there, but you might have to consider whether using Rust for a web dev project is going to be worth that cost, time, and technology kind of cost that might come to that. But just be upfront, make sure that you're talking based on facts and those sorts of things. I think most people can be convinced to use Rust. Now, you might ask this question too, but I won't answer it unless you do. But there are companies that tell you their reasons that they don't want to choose Rust, and there's a few of those as well that we can get into, and some of them make sense as well. So
I heard a lot from companies that said sort of once you're sort of working on figuring out what you want to build, right? Rust is maybe not ideal, right? Because I'm sort of, you want to like for an experimentation phase where sort of you are sort of making changes on an existing app or so, right? And you just want to try something out in a particular part of the app, but you don't want to like you're not concerned about everything else, right? But with Rust, sort of, if you change something here and everything else fails to compile, right, you need to fix all of that, although you don't really care, right? So for experimentation, it's maybe not ideal, but I think once you have sort of figured out what the thing you want to build is, right, then I think Rust is, in many cases, including many cases in web dev, is a great choice then.
At least Rust should always be in the conversation now, right?
Yeah.
For anything that you're going to be tackling, particularly something new. If you're trying to migrate from an existing project, obviously there's a lot of factors that go into that. And as a company, I empathize with, do we really want to rewrite this entire code base in Rust or any other language? Because there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. But for new projects, you should always consider Rust as at least one of the top languages that should be used and applicable. Now, I think there's like 3 or 4 potential reasons why companies may not choose to adopt Rust. I think customer demand is like, and that can be kind of a chicken and egg problem, is one. I think you mentioned learning curves concerns, but there's also like cultural things within the company itself. Like changing the culture of programming within a company is hard, especially the bigger you are, and the perception of Rust not being applicable to use cases. So it's interesting. I was at AWS reInvent in November in Las Vegas, and they have this huge showcase room with like a ton of companies, showcasing their wares and their applications and that sort of thing. I heard so many times from companies that I talked to that they know the value of Rust internally, but their customers have not yet come around to demanding it in their products. So it kind of creates this weird issue of, wow, yeah, I know Rust can be beneficial to me and to our developers and to the company, maybe even our product. But at some point as a company, you might have to just succumb to the pressures of, we have to get stuff out versus the time to like re-engineer a solution or redesign a solution or do something that, might take time away from shipping a product. And kind of a hard thing to balance. So it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that kind of thing is something sort of you would probably like face with any technology, right? Sort of always pressure like between sort of shipping and sort of improving things like for the clients and rewriting and so on. Previously we talked about learning curve and sort of the fact that it's sort of like not necessarily hard, but certainly not easy to build up a team working with Rust, right? Even if you have some people sort of who know it, maybe. But I think, or like maybe that's something that you heard from teams as well. I think Rust can also be a sort of competitive advantage because like virtually every engineer on the planet wants to work with it. They might not be doing it already, or they might not know it, but certainly like almost everybody wants to work with Rust, right? So everybody wants to learn. So if you can hire for Rust, I think it can also be, like I said, a competitive advantage because everyone is hungry for Rust jobs, right?
Yeah, I think objectively speaking, it can take time to learn Rust. And I mean, obviously the learning curve can be less steep from those coming from certain programming backgrounds like C++ or whatever. But there are literally concepts in Rust that require some time to get your head around, like how borrowing works and how ownership works, and all those kind of the key tenets of what Rust provides you is why it makes it so safe and all those sorts of things. You have to like wrap your head around those concepts. Companies, I think, would need to invest time, money, resources. I mean, they just need to do that and take the hit up front, allow their employees to learn it, even if they feel that it's not cost effective to do it and the status quo will be just fine. They just gotta kind of believe to run through that wall. But as someone who's worked at a big company, I get it. The bigger you are, the more time and resources it takes to kind of move a boulder up a hill, right? it just happens. And it might be short-sighted to think that way, but sometimes when you're running a company, sometimes near-term goals take over. Near-term goals take precedence over long-term ones. But I think, yeah, I mean, you just need to take the months. It could take months, half a year, whatever the time is. Like I said before, it's just kind of worth that time to make that happen, and then long term, it'll be pay dividends when you do. So,
in your experience, is the like performance and efficiency that Rust comes with also something sort of where like adopting it pays dividends in terms of reduced server cost, or just reduced cost for like computing resources?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have to architect your program in Rust correctly to make sure that happens. You're not worried about having kind of this virtual machine based environment running on the server, doing garbage collection, kind of this overhead of things that might occur in some other language or ecosystem. You take a shipped binary or a compiled binary, ship it onto a server that's just kind of running at its most optimized level. That's obviously most of the time, I would think, going to reduce your server costs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of a way you can spin it to higher ups. There could definitely potentially be a very significant money savings to using Rust long term. But then again, you got to make sure that they also understand you got to invest the time and invest the education, and to make sure that people are actually utilizing Rust correctly. They understand how it all works, and are developing their applications in a correct way as well. So
yeah, sure. But I mean, I think specifically in web and cloud environments, sort of where you have like very inefficient languages, right? You have like JavaScript, Ruby, Python, whatever, right? And then sort of when you look at companies that spend like hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars or whatever on AWS every month or so, like I think you really have potential for some substantial cost savings, right? Which would also justify having a few people learn Rust for some time, right?
Yeah, that's right. I agree. The cloud-based applications, like one of those things that you have to almost segment out what that might mean in practice. So like, obviously like a cloud application can have a front end, to it that, again, like we said before, you have to take some consideration on whether you're going to use Rust for that. But yeah, like, what that front end might access on the back end within the cloud. Yeah, for sure. I think you could definitely see a very big monetary savings, depending on how large your application is and how many people use it, and and those sorts of things. But I think there's definitely a big value on that side that could save you money on your cloud provider for sure.
Do you think the environmental aspect of that is something that's like interesting to people, or that's like something that is relevant for decision makers, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, so I personally think it's a very valid argument. And I think it was last year's reInvent, the former chair of the foundation spoke about environmental concerns there. And I think there's actually at least one study that I know of that showcases how, I think it was Rust was either 1 or 2 between, like C++ and Rust were tied, or it was really close about how much computing resources one of those applications will use compared to other languages. And it made a very clear point that the less resources that you might utilize in a server farm or data center or something like that, and that just has this downstream effect of potentially utilizing less power, less electricity, which requires less water to be used to, run the hydroelectric dam, whatever it is, right? That could be an environmental savings. Now, there are applications that Rust, can be utilized that might, I don't know if it uses less, more power, but I think it's good that Rust could be thought of for power hungry type of applications, whether that's stuff on the blockchain or something, right? Like those are very power hungry type of things. And if you decide to use Rust for that, it might still be kind of power hungry, but you might actually be able to improve the power usage for something like that.
Security being one of sort of the main reasons why companies would adopt Rust, right? So, but do you have like a recommendation sort of for someone who is at a company sort of that does any other technology, but they want to sort of get the decision makers to adopt Rust? Would you have sort of a recommendation for them, sort of what to do and what to say, sort of to convince decision makers beyond just security? Because in some cases, security is maybe not as important, right? But I think Rust would have more to offer than just security for those teams as well.
Yeah, that's why I was saying before, you want to make sure that you're taking the time to listen to what they're doing and what they want to do in the future with respect to the products they want to deliver their customers or the community and that sort of thing. So if you kind of hear this sort of I'm nervous about security thing, you kind of want to then lean into the security aspect of Rust. If you're talking about things like, hey, I wish my application would run faster. I mean, maybe it's fine, it's okay, but I wish I could just eke out a bit more performance on what I'm doing. Then you obviously want to talk a little bit about how Rust's performance model is actually can help you there. If you want to talk about productivity, if they're like, we develop really good work and but it really takes us a long time to do it. And I wish we could have our developers be a little bit more productive. And then you kind of talk about, hey, obviously, if you don't know Rust, you're gonna have to learn it. But once you do, you're going to find that the tooling and the available educational materials and the compiler itself is actually going to make your development team a lot more productive in the long run, because Rust actually helps you. Like the actual language helps you figure out what you're doing wrong when you write code. It'll tell you in the error message, hey, did you really mean to do this? Oh yeah, okay, fine. I can go ahead and make that happen. And time savings is a big deal, right? Cost, time, what technology you're using, security, like those are kind of the 4 or 5 different vectors that you kind of think about, and you just want to kind of tackle the right one depending on who you're talking to. I think it definitely goes well beyond security. It goes with those other things as well.
And do you think that the productivity improvements are really sort of that Rust sort of allows you to get to a working version of whatever you build faster?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess it depends. So you might be working on an application in a certain language or certain ecosystem where you may not feel as productive. So maybe you reduce the feature set of your application because you're time boxed into a certain amount of time when you need to release something, and you only do a certain set of things because what you're using is not allowing you to work quickly and iterate quickly. I used to work at Facebook, and it was a big PHP shop. Sure. And it used to be, and then we at Facebook created our own kind of PHP offshoot language called Hack, which was like a typed PHP before PHP had types and those sorts of things. You could really iterate really fast with PHP, right? I mean, you could be productive with PHP, but that said, you weren't necessarily knowing whether you were always correct what you were doing. Like you can press Control, F5 a bunch and see kind of what you're doing with PHP. So there are languages you can be really productive in, but that productivity might come at a cost at runtime. I think what Rust gives you is that type level of productivity because of what the tooling provides you and allows you to have, and the language itself and the standard library, like what they all give you, plus knowing that at runtime as well, you're not going to have to worry as much. So I think that's a big argument too.
Yeah, that's something that I talked about last week with Stefan as well. Sort of with Rust, you might be paying a little more upfront while writing the code, right? Which is in many cases easier with PHP or so, right? But then with PHP, you continue like paying after you ship, right? Because like bugs in production then, right? And Rust is probably just gonna run okay, and you can move on to the next thing, right? So overall, you're not paying more with Rust. You just like pay more initially, maybe, but then
Yeah.
like end paying earlier, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, like when we developed that language hack at Facebook, where we had this typed PHP, which basically allowed you, which provided a lot of benefit because you would know at least a lot of potential runtime errors beforehand because it was a typed system, and
Yeah.
you would be able to catch like type errors and stuff right before you would ship it. But that said, there was still a virtual machine backend when you actually ran it, and so we had HHVM was what it was called at Facebook.
Yeah.
It was really great. It was really like super fast, but you still had that kind of backend as well that would have to be spun up when you run something like Facebook.com or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have that issue with Rust, right? Because everything is done beforehand, and you're So I don't want to sit here and say that like no other ecosystem or language can allow you to be productive and be fast, but I just think Rust is one of those ones that it's really close to the top for both. So yeah, if not at the top, so yeah.
The point about types is very interesting, specifically in web context, right? Like in embedded, whatever, people have used C and so on, which is obviously typed as well. But in web, people have used like PHP, JavaScript, Ruby, all of these dynamic untyped languages, and all of them are like either have or are in the process of going back to being statically typed. Like in PHP, you have Hack, and in JavaScript, you have TypeScript.
And
in Ruby, you have
PHP itself is typed now. So yeah.
Ah, okay. I didn't even know. And then in Ruby, you have like sorbet. I think they have something going in Elixir, and so everybody's going back to type because you realize sort of like untyped dynamic sort of makes you fast initially, but once you have a bit of a bigger project, like obviously Facebook or like Meta has, but also many Ruby projects, many JavaScript projects, and so on. They're also big without type. Sort of, it's a bit like a CSS code base then, right? Where nobody dares to change anything. You just add more stuff that doesn't interfere with the existing stuff.
Yes.
And but then with all of those languages, you still compile back to the original thing, right? You still compile back, or like you have a virtual machine that runs Hack. You still compile TypeScript back to JavaScript. You compile the types out of sorbet back into Ruby. So you're paying a price, but you don't get all of the benefit, like you said, right? Because you still have the inefficiency that you had before. You just have a bit more safety up front.
Yeah, and you could eke out every cycle of performance on those backends and you can get close to being bare metal performance like some of those like Rust might give you, but you can't get it to zero like Rust might be able to do. So I think and it goes back to this might be the third time I said like I said, like Rust might not solve every engineering problem you have, and I can always tell somebody that there's reasons to use other frameworks, other languages, particularly like when it comes to front end and web development, right? Like I think it's like the hardest to square when you come to tell the benefits of Rust is how you talk to folks about front end and web development, because I think you mentioned it, like with so many great tested proven frameworks like React and languages like JavaScript, like those are well-known quantities. They've done the job. Big companies use them. It's like, it's one of those things that, if you want Rust to get involved, be part of that market, you really have to show some really high value. But I think it's not I think it can be done, and it may not be as hard as people might think, because particularly if you're already a Rust developer and you really want to stay with an ecosystem, like you have technologies like WebAssembly, right? That provides this compilation target for Rust code to run in web browsers and on the web. And you have like third-party frameworks like Vue and others that provide APIs to write applications that can target WASM. And so like people who want to use those kind of systems-based programming languages, or I put it in quotes, right? They now have options, and WebAssembly might be the solution for that. It might be something else, but I think the future's kind of bright when you choose, if you want to choose to have your application end to end written in Rust. There's even a book out. I went to Amazon before, I think yesterday. Like, there's Rust web development that's coming out soon. So like, people are writing books. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I would say, like, I'm personally not so convinced that sort of using Rust for building front-end web stuff is going to be good, because I think WebAssembly in the browser and so on is kind of, I think that's a bit tricky maybe, but I think the interesting thing is also that, like, WebAssembly used to start as a browser front-end thing, right? But I think now sort of the majority of use cases are running WebAssembly elsewhere, right? Like in embedded, but also
That's right.
like on edge functions, for example, right?
Yeah. WebAssembly is now becoming more multi-purpose than what it maybe if it wasn't initially intended for.
Right.
Right. I think you could be correct, right? Like, I guess my point is that whatever number of years ago, 3 years ago, considering Rust for anything front end or anything web development would have been a non-starter. I think now at least you can consider it. Although, I'm coming from Facebook, I have some biases towards like React and TypeScript and those sorts of things. Like, I still think that generally for a purely front end web application, those probably are the best way to go. But now I'm thinking about it. Before I wasn't thinking about it. Like, obviously, you're not going to use Rust. You're not going to use C++ for a front. I mean, what are you thinking, right? So, but now you can give it some thought. So
yeah. But I mean, with modern web apps, sort of, you also don't really have like the front and back end split so clearly anymore, right? It's not so clearly like browser, and then there's like one monolithic server app, but there's like browser, there is edge function, which is also kind of part of the front end. Maybe there is like an API server, there's some upstream services, maybe you have all kinds of custom databases now and so on. So I think there's a wide spectrum, right? And while Rust does maybe not fit sort of all in the front end, I think on edge functions or so, it's already a great fit, right? And then on the actual server side, like, it's great anyway.
So if you have the 7 steps of application writing, Rust is definitely good for at least the first 5 or 6. Right? Yeah. It's the 7th or the 6th or the 7th where, there's a lot of arguing that can be done. What you should do. Right? Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. But yeah, like I said, though, I think, like, even if you say that there's like these, 6 or 5, 6, 7 layers of a normal application nowadays, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, there was nothing. It was just obvious that you were not going to use something like Rust for the 6 or the top 2 layers. Yeah, Now you still may not, but hey, you might have a reason to now. You could think about it. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think we will probably see the Rust community grow, like, as it did for the past few years, like, in the next few years, and I think these are very exciting times, and I'm sure sort of the foundation, like, at the foundation, it must be very exciting as well.
There's a couple of things that are coming up in the foundation. We're actually thinking about education and training a lot these days. We want to work with educators to determine the best path for learning Rust. I mean, obviously, like, one path's not going to fit everybody, but trying to find something that's going to work for most. And it'd be great if, like, the foundation was involved in either supporting or helping develop solutions as a place to point companies that want to get their employees up to speed on Rust. So, like, we talked about how we can reduce the learning curve of people wanting to go to Rust. The foundation's kind of thinking about what can we do to help that process. Another thing, I didn't really mention this before, but, like, it's worth noting with respect to the foundation. We actually have a community survey that we ran some months ago. There's a joint Rust project and foundation community survey. We actually have a question that similar to like, why aren't you using Rust today, or what is stopping you from using Rust? I haven't fully seen the results of that survey yet, but I'm really interested to kind of find out what people said to that and see if they kind of match my thinking as well. So once once we can find results from that survey and seeing what things we as the foundation could maybe target different programs, initiatives to figure out like, okay, how do we best resolve some of these issues that people might be running across, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be awesome. Yeah, if you could sort of support people sort of overcoming these hurdles they're facing when trying to get Rust adopted at their workplace, I think that would be awesome. Yeah. And by the way, the foundation will be at Eurorust in October as well. So everyone interested to talking to you, maybe, like, I'm not sure who will be there, but like there will
At least
certainly
some
be
of our
people from the
European
foundation.
contingent will be there. Yeah, at least some folks from Europe will be there. I'll be at Rust Conf in September. So I may be at Eurorust too. But yeah, someone from the Rust Foundation will be there for sure. At least one, probably more. So, yeah.
Cool, great. So thanks again for joining today, and it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, like I said, I get kind of excited talking about this stuff. So hopefully it's useful for people to hear what's going on in the Rust community and the Rust Foundation and everywhere. So yeah, thank you for having me, Marco.